Have any of you read our speaker's book yet? Uh-oh, that I shouldn't have asked it that way, right? I have. It's pretty amazing. But Bem's book is about more than the book itself, but also what she did to create it, which is very interesting. And it's available at the Farrell Shop. But Bem Culiat has a career of 40 years as a scientist, entrepreneur, educator, and book author. She's a molecular geneticist specializing in tissue repair and regeneration. She's a long resume. She began an entrepreneurial journey by co-founding Null One Therapeutics, a biotech company in regenerative medicine. She was a science advisor to Regent's College, Vancouver, Canada. And as part of that, she met Dr. Jenny McLaren, the co-author of her book. So she has won many awards. She and I sat down and talked about the book, and she's going to talk about things in the book, but also what she did to create it, things I had no idea went on. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And Bem, come on in. And I think this will work. And of course, it stopped. So I'll go by there and I'll move them. I don't know. It worked before. Okay. But I'll do the slide.
So good morning. I'm really happy to be here. And this is a milestone presentation for me. I've given a lot of presentations in different countries, different institutions, but today marks the first time I'm speaking to a Rotary Club. So I'm very delighted to do that. And I'm delighted to do that. And this is special because this is actually, since the book came out, this is the first of 3 Rotary clubs that I'm speaking to between now and February. So to do my first Rotary presentation in the city I call home for 31 years, that is really special to me. So I thank Tony for the invitation. And I did give him a chance to revoke the invitation after he read the book. And I said, Tony, read the book and see if your group would still be interested in listening to me. And he said, yes. He goes, you know, I think you should speak to our group. So as Tony said, this book is, my talk this morning is not just about what's in the book, but also what it took to create this piece of work. This is the first book I've ever written. It's the first, well, non-scientific one, and also the first one my friend Jenny McLaren did. So the next slide. When I came to America about 31 years ago, I had a general idea of what my life was going to be. So I was gonna come to the United States, I'm gonna study very hard in graduate school, I'm gonna find a new job, I'm gonna try to stay out of big debt, and then at some point, you know, I'm gonna retire comfortably somewhere. Well, so this slide took 40 years to build, and my life didn't turn out really the way I had thought it was gonna be. The first part seemed like the way I thought it was gonna be. So I'm a scientist trained in multiple fields. So I started in the field of genetics and cell biology. I was born and raised in the Philippines. And I came to America because there was a very special program by the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and ORNL. This was for a PhD in biomedical sciences, which was more integrating a lot of basic science with research. And that really appealed to me. I'm sort of a person who's interested in multiple things. So I thought a PhD in biomedical sciences seemed like really interesting. So I studied biomedical sciences with a specialty in genomics and molecular biology at the University of Tennessee, but did most of my PhD really at ORNL. And fortunately, I also taught for 10 years while I was studying at the University of the Philippines and at UT. So I had 20 years already in when I finished my PhD. So at ORNL, I was fortunate enough to be offered a job immediately after my PhD, which is unusual. Typically when you do graduate work in a university or a place, typically they don't give you a job, they want you to go elsewhere. But I was fortunate because at ORNL, I got to work with the legendary Mouse House group and so Lee Russell was one of my major mentors and influencers in my life. And it was also exciting because that was the time when the government decided we're going to sequence the entire DNA or the human genome. And so 3 of the human chromosomes 5, 16, and 19, were actually sequenced by the federal government, by the Department of Energy, in different laboratories. And my role in that project was not the DNA sequencing itself. There were people who loved doing that. My work was, what did these genes do? And I was interested in that because I really wanted to know what was the genetic basis for some of the most debilitating disorders and diseases that we have. I was really clearly, already had a burden for being able to contribute to the understanding and the treatment. And during that time, I discovered, using information coming from the human genome before it was even revealed to the world, because you were seeing the sequences and the code as it was being generated, discovered a very interesting protein. It's called the Null One Protein, which is a master molecule and a signaling protein that is used when we were babies in our mother's womb. It is used by the body as a signal to make and mature many significant organs and tissues in the body. And so I realized, okay, well, if this is something that could make tissue very quickly and mature it quickly, because that's what happens during development. Well, what if we're injured as adults? Can the body still recognize the protein and make new tissue quickly, mature it so that we could recover function? And obviously the answer to that is yes. So I have about 20 patents at ORNL that was directed towards the use of the Null One protein in order to regenerate tissue after its damage. And then I left. The discoveries were so compelling that I thought, I'll take a risk. And I retired early from ORNL to build and co-found a biotech company called Null One Therapeutics. And today, after work with Null One, the Null One protein is so big and difficult to make. So I had to redesign the molecule in a form that it can be easier to manufacture and easier to work with as a drug or in a device. And so today, my company is actually in the verge of presenting all the data we have to the FDA in order to go to human clinical trials. So we've done a lot in this area. But this is not the main. Also, I like to mention that we are using that now to treat severe lung damage coming from viral infections and also other things like COPD and pulmonary fibrosis. So, but what I came to talk about today is really how my career made a very unexpected turn, because I met a very remarkable doctor, a pediatrician, a public health expert, and also a theologian. That's an interesting mix of expertise. And so I met Jenny in Knoxville. I took a 1-year break from when I left ORNL to start Null One Therapeutics. I've been working so hard for so long. I said, I need 1-year break. So I took a break for 1 year before really committing to Null One Therapeutics. And then a mutual friend said, hey, there's this doctor who is going to talk about bioethics in Knoxville. And this is continuing medical education for doctors and nurses. So at that time, biology was really booming. And there was so much knowledge, techniques, and products that were really challenging from before we were even conceived to when we die. A lot of biology that challenges bioethics. And so Jenny was here to talk to doctors and nurses about the challenges of doing medicine in this new era of just really significant changes in biological capability. So I met Jenny and we shared together some common passion. One is that we really love both science and medicine, and we were interested in healing. As Jenny says in a book, together Bem and I attend to biochemical processes and seek to promote wholeness and healing from laboratory, that's my work, to the bedside, that's her work. Jenny has dedicated her life to healing children from, in marginalized communities. So children with special needs, children who've been trafficked, children who are some of the poorest communities in the United States and also abroad. So she's been committed to healing, and I've been working in basic research, trying to generate knowledge and also products that would help with healing. And so this friendship then moved into a professional partnership in Canada. So Jenny, I was able to get a grant from the Sir John Templeton Foundation, and the project was actually to train and to invite key Christian leaders and to tell them about how science is done and just how wonderful science is. And it is not always hostile to your faith, but it could be affirming of their faith. And so over 10 years ago, Jenny recognized that there's going to be a big problem when you have major Christian leaders who have this posture that science is always there to squash their faith, or that it's always hostile to their faith. And so, and we didn't even know that it will become relevant 10 years later in a pandemic, that this was a very important project to integrate our understandings of both science and faith. So I was the science advisor for this project. And we basically took a dozen major Christian leaders every year, and I just shared with them how science is done, and also the science that I was doing, which at that time, we were using the Null One Protein to heal very difficult wounds to heal. So, and then about probably 8 years after this. So I'd like to mention that this was not really novel in terms of looking at both science and faith and integrating them, not as, adversaries, but that these two can be complementing each other. And so during that project, I actually got to go over history and also tell many of these Christian leaders that there have been really significant breakthroughs from people of faith. And this is just a small sampling of that. Gregor Mendel, obviously, is the father of my field, genetics, and he was a priest. And the discoveries of Louis Pasteur in microbiology, vaccines, immunology were very critical to us during the pandemic. And today, for those who are in the science field or in the field of healthcare would know that one of the most vocal and really accomplished scientists in biology of our time is Dr. Francis Collins. He's the head of the NIH right now, although he's leaving that post at the end of the year. But he was also a basic scientist who discovered the gene for cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, and neurofibromatosis. So what we've been doing is not something that was really earth-shaking. I think it was just something that was kind of forgotten, in the process of history and many things happening, that it seems people thinking that you cannot integrate both science and faith. So then 8 years later, after I did this project with Jenny always had this dream that, later on in life, she will gather 6 women, one for every decade of her life, who were instrumental in her life, in her career and her personal life. And she would gather 6 women who did not know each other. And she treated us to a retreat in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. And if you've been there, it's an incredibly grand, wonderful place to be. She gathered us and we shared, our lives. And from this group of women, she pretty much told me, hey, why don't you tell them about what you did in Canada, training pastors and talking about science and faith and about your life. And 3 of the attendees of this retreat were actually authors. And one was a famous, if you're in poetry, is Lucy Shaw, who is a well-known British poet. She lives in Washington State, and also the best friend of Madeleine L'Engle, who's probably the more popular, well-known author. And when she was listening to me talk about this, and the way Jenny and I were talking about our life and science and medicine and faith, she said, you should write a book. And we said, write a book? Jenny's a full-time doctor. I'm a full-time scientist. How do we write and Jenny's the mother of 5 kids. I have 1 child. And it's like, how do we fit writing a book? And also we're 60 something. And it's kind of like if I wrote a book and what it would take to do one, I would have done it younger. Although now I realize I would also be more foolish, and I probably don't know much when I was younger. But nonetheless, Lucy challenges, I'll do everything I can to help you write this book. And so she essentially encouraged us and championed us. And she said, I have a friend, his name is Philip. And a long time ago, he wrote books similar to what I think you should write. And so I said, okay, we'll talk to your friend, Philip. And then I said, okay. And then I didn't realize that Philip was Philip Yancey, who is a very accomplished writer. He has written about, and he has sold about 17 million books translated into 50 languages. And a long time ago, he wrote a book with Dr. Paul Brand, who is one of the leading recognized authorities on leprosy, one of the most dreaded diseases of our, in ancient times, certainly in the Bible. And Dr. Brand was very significant in solving that particular medical problem. And Philip actually visited him in order to understand more about that. So Philip essentially gave us a crash course in writing because we've never done a book before. And so I just summarized a lot of what I learned in this journey, because there may be some of you wanting to write a book or always wanted to write a book, but never, started one. So, so we learned from Philip that you really cannot please everybody. So you need to target a primary audience. And our primary audience for the book are people primarily in our community, people of science and medicine and faith, or anybody that's open to such a conversation. But he also said that when you write for your primary audience, you also need to write it in a way that people can eavesdrop. And if they like the conversation, they can join in. And so this is a book that is open to whatever your religious or political affiliation, or whether you're not trained in a technical field. It is written in a way. Jen is a pediatrician. She has explained very complex things to children and very frightened parents. So this is written in a way that's really accessible to most people from different backgrounds. And also there were two of us, and we really cannot have one chapter me, one chapter Jenny. They said for this to work, it has to be really integrated. And Jenny, although this is her first book, is really a professional writer. She's written for magazines and has received a lot of awards to do that. So the other reason why Jenny also wrote the book, not only is because she's really a gifted writer, is that English is not my first language. English is my fourth language. And so it is the language of my profession, but it's not the language of my heart and my soul. And this book is not just a book of science and medicine. This is also a book of Jenny's life and my life. And that took a lot of heart and soul. And English is not my primary mode of communication to do that. So also Philip said, people really don't want you to preach at them or to lecture them. So I'm hoping I'm not like lecturing today. Tell them stories, compelling stories. They'll remember the stories of the principles you want them to learn more than they will ever learn the pathway to a cell becoming this to that. And so this book is a book of stories also. And then the other one is that people need a reason to listen to you. There's so many books. There's so many lectures, especially today where we can look at YouTube and we can look at podcasts and blogs. There's so many people to listen from. So why on earth would they listen to you? And Jen and I felt compelled to write this book. We were working primarily from 9 in the evening to 3 in the morning because we were working the whole day. So this book was written. In fact, we were never been in the same space. Since we decided from that retreat to write a book to today, we've never been physically in the same space. So we did this essentially long distance on opposite coasts. But we felt compelled to write it because we really saw how much most of us has become walking wounded people. And that so much of what we do today, like there's been so much casualty in broken relationships, broken organizations and communities. And most often than not, we don't know how to fix those. We don't know how to heal those. We just move on from one relationship to another or one organization to another, but we haven't really kind of sat down and thought maybe we could do better in terms of not just physical healing, but healing some of the ruptures in our communities. So we felt we had, and that has become even more serious during the pandemic and also through about 8 years of just great political conflicts, in our country and even other countries. So we thought, I think people have a good reason to listen to us. And the last one is Philip said, okay, all of these pointers I have for you, I don't want to see the manuscript until it's done, beginning to end. You just have to write what you feel you need to write. You just need to write without fear, not fearing what people would say, not fearing, how it would work out. And thankfully, after 2 years of working night to dawn for me and Jenny, is that we finished the book and gave the final manuscript to Philip Yancey. And this is what he said, and decided to endorse it after he read it. When I began reading Designed to Heal, I felt the same flush of excitement that I had when I first encountered Dr. Paul Brand, my collaborator on 3 books. These 2 authors, a researcher and a physician, have woven together a rare combination of vivid science, compassionate storytelling, and lasting spiritual lessons. A delight to read. That's high praise from somebody who is very successful in the area of writing and publishing books like this. More importantly for me is that this was a risk. It's always a risk when you're a scientist and you talk about things that are personal, much less things that are spiritual. People think you're not a competent, scientist if you kind of, is also a person of faith. So it was really important to me that scientists read it, and we sent it to many scientists, primarily biologists. But this one is special to me because this came from an astrophysicist who was trained in MIT and Calvin College, and a president of a foundation called BioLogos, which also tries to integrate science and faith. And so Dr. Harsma said, in this engaging book, a physician and a scientist share stories of injury and healing. As they describe the amazing biological processes that work in our physical bodies, we gain insights into ways to promote healing in our relationships, our churches, and our communities. This is a timely book, excellent for preachers, small groups, and our wounded world. And I think that is really important to the Rotary. You do a lot of good work in the city, and you care about communities. You care that those communities are healthy. You care about helping people in that community that are struggling. And so I'm going to do a very, very quick tour, basically, of what's in the book, minus the stories, because I won't have time to tell stories. So I'll give you a very quick overview of what's in the book, and then open it more to questions, because I think there's probably more questions than me spending the rest of the time telling you what's in the book, because I want you to read the book. So the book is a book of science and medicine. So we describe, hopefully in a very engaging and exciting and in an accessible way, the steps that happen when our tissues are injured and it's attempting to heal. So we take through the 4 processes: clotting and inflammation, which is basically a stage where it's needed for survival. And then new tissue formation, where new and different tissues have to be made in order for injury to be fixed. A lot of growth happens at this stage. And then finally, remodeling and maturation, which is scarring and wound closure. And so we take you through this, but we write it in a way that people can really understand, even if they don't have a medical or a biology degree. And doing so in a manner where you can really see the beauty, the complexity, the organization, the functionality, and the interdependence of these processes. So chapters, so from these physical processes that our bodies heal, we extract principles that we think are relevant today to healing, not physically, but healing some of the breaks in our lives. So if you look at the properties of physical healing, these are some of the main things you will see. One is that our bodies do have great capability to heal, and is oriented towards healing. We still have factors. Even as we age, there are still factors that can be stimulated so that tissue can heal. Second is that it is a dynamic process. It does take time. And there are very distinct stages of healing, from the injury to the repair and regeneration. It has to go through specific stages, because those stages prepare for the next stage, and you can't skip them. And also, one is that there is sustained collaboration of a multitude of players and specific roles to perform at certain times. And the last one, which is really difficult to, both from a physical and a non-physical perspective, is that repair and regeneration in the body requires death and loss. It requires a lot of tissues dying, actually, and a lot of transformation. So we take through and tell stories at different stages of healing in order to illustrate some of these principles. And I think what really has been exciting for me with this book is that people take the book and they read it, and they see more than what we wrote in there. And so this is really not a manual where, okay, step 1 to 10, and then you'll be okay. This is really us sharing our lives and sharing principles so that people can take a look and then pretty much apply it the way that is most relevant to them. So for stage 1, for example, is the first stage of injury is clotting and hemostasis. So the first response of the body to injury is to preserve life. And therefore, one of the insights that we got from this is that when you have injuries in communities and relationships, that the first thing to do is really to identify the factors and stop factors that are going to make things worse, whether they're words or action that just cause irreparable damage. It also requires refraining from things that we typically do, which is finding blame, judgment, rushing to advise, or this one is for me, fixing the situation before you even truly understand what is going on. And for your group, I think because you do such a lot of work in this area, is that in many cases, in injuries to communities and relationships, giving immediate help to alleviate panic and despair is actually very important. And a lot of organizations like yours do this. And this could be food, money, medicine, shelter, or a critically needed resource. And another thing that people underestimate is that when people are going through injury in their lives, committing to somebody to say, we don't know how this is going to go yet, or what's the solution here, but I'm going to be here and I'm going to help you work out through this thing. That too is, I think, important in this stage. The second stage is one that is really being studied today, because in tissue damage, this is the one that really causes a lot of problems. And this is where today, some of the most difficult wounds that require amputation and can cause life-threatening situations are because they're stuck in this stage. And this is the stage of inflammation. It is a necessary stage in tissue healing, because this is really the phase where the body clears out pathogens, clears out dead tissue, and also the immune system comes to defend against pathogen and things that are ongoing. But we actually, this is the chapter that required the most rewriting. The book was done before COVID-19 hit. But when COVID-19 hit and Jenny was dealing with, Washington State was one of the worst hit, not New York, at the very beginning of the pandemic. So she was dealing with patients and children and just dealing with this new pandemic. And I was actually, my company just, read the federal government's plea or request that if you have any technology at all that could be useful in this pandemic, can you tweak it in order to deal with issues of this pandemic? And then so we realized, okay, we've been doing wound healing, but this could work in lungs too. We look at lung biology, what this protein did in lungs, and most of the deaths from COVID are coming from lung collapse. So respiratory collapse or acute respiratory distress syndrome. So we did that. So I got to look at basically COVID-19 and the extreme inflammation that it causes in the body. A lot of the damage to your bodies from COVID-19 is due to hyperinflammation and over defending against the virus. So both Jenny and I went to our publisher and said, we know the manuscript is done, but we would like to tweak it and talk more about inflammation, because not only is this a very dangerous stage if we're stuck there in physical tissue, but we think we are now in a chronic state of outrage and inflammation in most of our communities. And so we would like to look at principles here. And so for this, the key things that we took out of this is that you need it, typically you're inflamed and upset about things that you care about. That's actually good. It's a good, healthy response. But at the same time, there's also things that will actually stir up inflammation during injury. So in non-physical healing, things like anger, resentment, slander, malice, gossip, name calling, lies and misinformation are things that keep things from continuing to be inflamed. So I was really glad to be reminded today that in the four-way test, the first thing they ask is it the truth? Is it the truth? Because many of the problems in fixing relationships and even what we've been through already in over a year is because people are reacting to and making decisions based on things that are not true. So there's been so many misinformation and lies, and that first thing is really important. Is it the truth? Because it could really keep you in this very dangerous stage of inflammation. The other thing is that you really actually need to be intentional. Most things kind of just devolve into chaos or disorder and get worse unless you're really intentional in building a community and organization that actually builds relationships rather than tear it apart or dispose of it when things are not very comfortable. So this stage is a stage that I'm most an expert in, because the Null One Protein actually is a protein, and the reason why it's very powerful in rebuilding tissue is that it actually tells cells to secrete a substance on the outside. It's called the extracellular matrix. That substance was supposed to be, early on, we thought it was just a glue to hold the cells so that you have a 3D organ structure. Today, we know more that that extracellular matrix is actually the way cells communicate to one another so that tissue can do its function. If it's in the heart or in the muscle or in bone, you need that extracellular matrix, not just to hold a certain structure, but also for communication to be the correct one. And so we use this as a metaphor for the fact that you do need things to bind us together in a community, not just so that you have structure. This is one of the most organized events I've been to. Actually, I was very impressed when I walk into the door in terms of, the things that have been prepared and how you went through this meeting today. You do need structure and organization. But in order for, I think, communities and groups to really function and do what they're intended to do, you think less of the organization, you think more that it's an organism. And that really requires constant communication and transformation. So stages in this particular chapters of the book, we talk a lot about experiences of communities worldwide and how to build strong communities and to build them before crisis hit. Because when you don't have the structure or the mechanisms, you're not strong before something hits you. That's kind of, you're in trouble when you're trying to kind of just make things along the way. So the last one is the most personal one that Jenny and I talk about, which is scarring and maturation. That the default mechanism of the adult body is to scar. It is a response to injury in order to survive. And so true regeneration is rare. That's what companies like us are trying to build products in order to have true regeneration rather than just scarring. But today it's still the default pathway. But what people don't know is that scars need to be aligned to the rest of the body in order for the body to still be able to function. And that there are actually scars that could kill you. If scars are in your brain, in your heart, or in your lungs, you will be severely disabled, and also your lifespan is considerably shortened if you have scars there. So there are scars that are dangerous and scars that we need to recognize whether you are scarred in a particular area and it's preventing you from a flourishing life. And so we talk in these chapters of scars that Jenny and I have been through. As I said, when we wrote the book, we could have just written a book of science and medicine. We were experts enough, certainly, to do that. But we felt that it wouldn't really be authentic if we just tell stories of people. Jenny tells stories about her patients. I tell stories about my mice and my laboratory. But we needed to tell and be authentic that, we're also experts in woundedness, of having been through traumatic events in life, and how some of these principles have been very useful to us. So I hope that when you read the book, the stories will kind of merge with some of these principles, and you will be able to extract your own insights from it and be helpful. And so I will end by saying that this was quite an endeavor for me and Jenny. Publishing has changed a lot. So we've had to do things mostly virtually. I've had an international tour that was supposed to start in Honolulu, Hawaii, that the Delta variant pretty much eliminated an entire international tour in 4 countries. But we're living through interesting times, and times where we have to be creative and also need to adapt. So we have more resources. We've spoken to numbers of communities and people in different professions. So Jenny's blog actually has a compilation of radio, TV, blogs, and other events that we've done. And the book is available locally only at Barbara Farrell's shop. They're already autographed if you want an autographed copy. But it's also available through all the major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and pretty much most of the online booksellers are selling the book. And there are reviews there that you could read and see if this is something that might be worth your time reading.
I'm just going to stay around after, but if there's 1 or 2 questions real quick. Judy?
Oh my goodness, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We didn't hear that. What did she say?
That was Judy Gray, and Judy said, thank you for a great talk, and that her book is her book group's book. So there you go. Any, Stephen, go ahead.
As part of your tour, how you promote the book, are you talking to corporations?
So let me repeat the question for the video. So the question was from Stephen was, is she talking to any corporations?
Not a specific corporation. Like I said, I have 3. I've just started speaking to the business community, including this Rotary Club. I have the Oak Ridge Lunch Club, and then Farragut Rotary, but not to one specific corporations, but to business people, yes.
One more question, please, and then you can talk at it.
Obviously, parallels between our country, fractures and fractures versus fractures. Do you see the two coming out from first?
Can you kind of repeat the question, Ben?
Yes, so the question is that, in this time of the pandemic where we have a lot of conflicts and differences, am I seeing healing happen in a more person-to-person mechanism or big organizations facilitating it? I think you need all. I really think you need all because there is a time, there's a safety, and there is a health consideration. So Jenny and I, Jenny was part of the vaccine rollout in Washington State. And she was just, in fact, a lot of her recommendations for marginalized children are read in Congress. And also she was just in Washington, DC, speaking to how, obviously she's in the pediatric space, how there can be better dissemination of information. She's also worked in Tennessee with Vanderbilt University, just talking to doctors. How do we explain things better so that there's less conflict and people can avail of resources? So from Jenny's perspective, it's happening at a national level. From my perspective, because I'm still running, a biotech company, a lot of what I have done to facilitate, and we've used the book for that. As you know, Jenny and I are not dependent on writing a book for our livelihood. We are still primarily working our jobs. So I couldn't count the number of times I've spoken to people in Asia, because I was born and raised in the Philippines. And you think there's fracture here and there's problems here. Oh my goodness. In my country, they almost went into almost a martial law and also literally punitive measures in order to get people to do things. So it's far, far worse there. So I've done one-on-one with, I've done a webinar for 1,200 people in 12 countries, basically, and academics and people in healthcare, and just telling them there are ways to communicate better so that you're out of this chronic outrage and misunderstanding. So we're doing everything. I would speak one-on-one with somebody who, and I also work with some families who are going through severe COVID and just giving them encouragement and preparing them for the next stage as, their loved one is in ICU and things happen. So I do family to family, patient to patient interaction, and also groups. Mostly it's been virtual because of the Delta variant, but we're thinking of doing more in person, maybe around April or May next year, and do that. So I think you need everything.
Thanks again, Ben.
Yeah.